Hi, everybody. It's Mr. Bob. How are you? So, our next chapter in Street Shadows is Chapter 7, Donut. But before we get to that, I want to mention a couple things. One is I'm working on some new things for videos. Now, it's going to take some time to get it incorporated into all my videos, but be patient. We'll do some. But I hope you have a chance to look at some other videos on my channel. One that I've just finished is what you might call a beta version of Honor to Mrs. Dawson, called The Principal from the Black Lagoon. And there's two versions. One is the regular version, and one is a version I call beta version. And I'd like you to see what the beta version is like if you can. Anyway, the second thing is this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. And I know Mrs. Husky loves you dearly. So if you get a chance, send her a message on Classroom or whatever way that you have access to, perhaps her email or whatever, and just tell her thanks. She works really hard, maybe way harder than you ever imagined. She really cares deeply for every one of you. So anyway, this is Chapter 7, Donut, and we start with Pika. For a few weeks, Pika continued to cross the busy road and explore the city with her family. Although it was going well, she could feel her anxiety rising with each day. She still hadn't been able to catch her own prey, and she could see that her parents were getting more and more worried, though they tried not to show it. She had lied a few times about catching something when no one was looking, but she wasn't sure that anyone believed her anymore. Things became worse when large machines invaded the nearby forest. The rumblings and musty human smells hung in the air. Now, all that remained as a buffer between their territory and the construction site was a thin strip of trees. Pika couldn't stop thinking about this disturbance and worrying about Scruff. She hadn't smelled him on any of her family's hunting missions and wondered if something had happened to him. And she wanted to look around more at night when the machines were quiet, but Gree and Lamar had forbidden the pups to go there and avoided the area themselves. Pika's siblings seemed to accept the situation, trusting their parents to protect them. However, Pika was unsatisfied. If the machines had dug up most of the forest already, how did her parents know that they had finished their destructive march? What would stop them from pushing through the last few trees and into their home? One day, especially hot for autumn, that afternoon as the sun beat down on the meadow, her fur itched and she felt restless. Even ducking under a large bush and digging down into the dirt didn't completely cool her off. Looking around, she saw her family asleep, spread out under various bushes around the meadow. Now that they were more than half of their adult size and the threat of Jagger had passed, the pups were not required to always stay close to the adults. Pika turned over and tried to nap for about an hour or so. Hearing an especially loud screech of metal, she opened her eyes and raised her head. Feeling an itch in her back leg, she rolled out from under the bush for a good stretch and scratch and stood for a few moments, looking around. Her family continued to nap, undisturbed by the noises. She began to walk slowly, skirting the side of the forest, staying on their side of the neutral path. Using each nostril independently, she focused on the construction site, separating out the individual smells that wafted in her direction. Analyzing them with curiosity, she picked out sweat, humans, machines, oil, and the musty smell of deep earth. Suddenly, sliding in under the usual smells, she sensed something that she had never smelled before. It reminded her of human food she had once found on the golf course, but it had a sweetness she had never before sensed. The smell was very faint, and with the next gentle breeze, she lost it. It was definitely coming from the direction of the construction site. She took a few more steps, coming to the edge of the golf course and straining to smell what was happening through the trees. She picked up the sweet scent again and noticed her mouth beginning to water. Taking one more look around, Pika decided to take a very quick peek. She entered the small patch of trees, threading her way between two large hemlocks. The air was immediately cooler, and the ground was soft under her feet. She sniffed carefully for any signs of Jagger. There was nothing. She did pick up the scent of an unknown coyote, but it was old. She saw a narrow path in front of her and followed it, winding around a few thick bushes. The forest air invigorated her, and she suddenly felt very awake. Moments later, she arrived at the edge of the construction site. In front of her was a thick wire fence, and she saw that there was a small opening between two sections of the fence. Trying to get a better view of the machines, she carefully squeezed through the opening and jumped under a large bush on the other side. Squirming forward on her belly, she peered out between the branches and leaves. Narrowing her eyes against the bright sun, she saw a small, low building in front of her. She waited a few moments, listening attentively, and trotted closer to it, peering around the side. She gasped at the sudden onslaught of shapes and colors. It was chaos, and it was difficult for her to know what she was looking at. She flattened her ears against her head to try to muffle the screeching. She focused on the machine closest to her. It was a large metallic beast, bigger than some of the buildings in the golf course, and it was scooping dirt and rocks from a large pile, dropping them into a hole. Further away, several machines with enormous wheels drove back and forth, emitting a series of shrieking beeps. Most surprisingly, a mammoth structure rising out of the hole in the earth. Rows and rows of metal bars created the skeleton of a large cube several times larger than the largest building Pika had ever seen. Her parents hadn't said anything about a skeleton. She would have to tell them about this. She was about to turn around to quickly return to the safety of the hillside when suddenly that unique, sweet smell drifted back into her consciousness. Flaring her nostrils, she zeroed in on the source. A short distance from her, on the side of the building, was a small set of stairs leading to a door. There, sitting on the bottom step, was a large, sweet-smelling box. She knew she couldn't go any further, but suddenly had the urge to bring some back for her family. They were always the ones to provide for her. Wouldn't it be great if she could come back and share something new and delicious with them? Pika checked again for human movement or sound. She stayed still for a moment, all senses alert. She knew that it would be better to leave now, while she was safe. However, she didn't sense any humans nearby, and the smell coming from that box was so tempting. With a final look around, she followed the edge of the building until she reached the stairs. The smell was much stronger now, and she was able to pick out new elements. Ripe fruit, something she couldn't quite identify. She bumped the box gently with her nose. She fell over on its side, causing her to jump back with a surprise. A few objects tumbled out of it onto the ground, and Pika lowered her head to inspect them. They were round and lightly colored, and as she breathed in, a fine powder blew into her nose, causing her to sneeze. She took a tentative bite. It gave away easily in her jaws, dissolving into her mouth with a sweet, sticky sensation. She closed her eyes in bliss. Swallowing, she lowered her head and took a big bite, noticing a sticky fruit substance exploding out of the object as she ate it. Smells and sounds faded away. Each bite revealed a new sensory adventure. She was so focused on the smells and taste that she didn't immediately register the crunching of heavy feet on gravel. Suddenly there was a loud shout. Pika whipped her head and saw human feet in front of her. Standing at the corner of the building were 3 large men. Panic stopped her breath and she froze, staring at them. The only thing her brain registered was the fact that these men were standing directly between her and the fence. One of the men shouted again, taking a step toward her. His movement unlocked something in Pika, and she found herself able to flee. She dodged to the side and tried to turn back toward the gap in the fence, but the men were just a few feet away from it, and she veered away in fear. Wheeling around, she ran along the line of the fence, away from the men, desperately looking for another exit. She took a few more strides, searching the fence line in desperation, when suddenly she became aware of something blocking her path. She skidded to a stop as her face hit another fence. She had reached a corner and was blocked in on 2 sides. She whirled, feeling trapped. "Help!" Her voice was a puppy yelp. She leapt up the fence, trying to climb it, her paws scrambling to find something to cling to, but she fell down into the dirt. Her head whirled as she saw machines and men approaching her from all sides. "Over here!" The bark was familiar. Pika looked toward the sound and saw Scruff staring at her from the other side of the fence. He was bigger and skinnier than when she had seen him last, but the tufts of fur sticking up from between his ears were unmistakable, as was his smell. He pointed with his nose to a small hole in the fence that she had missed the first time she raced past it. She bounded to the spot, flung her body underneath. The hole was lopsided, and one of the metal prongs snagged her side. She yelped with pain and tried to move forward, but she was stuck. She could hear a machine growing louder and louder and felt the dust hitting her fur. She didn't have long now. It sounded like it was almost on top of her. With a long, high howl, she dug her back claws into the soft earth and pushed hard. The metal piece scraped down her side, ripping into her skin, but she slid through to the other side. She jumped up, leapt into the safety of a bush. The noise of metal wrenching against itself sounded loudly behind her, and she exited the far side of the bush, running blindly. She finally stopped in the shadow of a tall hemlock, breathing hard, and looking back to make sure the humans weren't pursuing her. She only saw Scruff trotting after her. "Scruff," she said, panting. She craned her neck backwards to investigate the cut on her side, and felt that it was wet with blood. She looked up again, and her eyes met the angry eyes of Scruff. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice accusatory. "I was worried about the construction and worried about you. Are you mad at me?" He huffed angrily. "This is my forest." Pika tilted her head to look at him. "Scruff, what's wrong?" She couldn't understand what had changed since they had last played. His eyes didn't look the same. They looked cold. Scruff looked down. "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want ever to see you again." Pika frowned. "I don't understand. I need to ask you something important. It's about Jagger." Scruff just raised his eyes to her suspiciously. "What?" "I haven't seen you. Well, I overheard my parents talking about him. They said he was killed before. I was worried about you." "Don't be." Scruff's face hardened. "Don't believe anything your parents say. Jagger was the one who rescued me, not them." And just then a familiar scent blew through the air, and they both froze. Scruff looked at her and shook his head. "He's coming. You should get out of here, quickly." The danger was imminent. She had no time to lose. If he were to catch her here, she shuddered. Without waiting another second, she whirled and took off back toward home. Her side hurting sharply, she lengthened her stride. She ran blindly without looking where she was going. Branches whipped her face, and her paws stumbled on rocks. "Run, run, run," coursed through her mind. She missed a root sticking out and tripped, rolling a few times before jumping back and dizzily continuing her flight. A few minutes later, she sensed light, and then she broke out into the corner of the hillside. She risked a glance behind her. Nothing moved. She slowed to a lope, breathing hard and tucking back into the bushes that surrounded the golf course. As her panic subsided, she became aware of the stinging on her back where the fence had raked her, a throbbing left paw, and bits of bark and moss stuck to her fur. She squinted, trying to make out the shapes of her family lying in the bushes. Finally, she saw her mother, Gree, raised her head at her approach, and Pika's terror was suddenly replaced with a wave of relief. She stopped, breathing hard. The relief gave way to a shame. She had been incredibly stupid to venture out of their home territory, and even more stupid to enter the construction site. She had completely ignored her parents' rules and had risked her life. She found herself desperately wanting her mother, but also fearing her anger. Dane raised his head and looked at her. A few seconds later, he jumped to his feet and trotted towards her. His smile disappeared as he drew closer, seeing the gash on her side and the way she favored her front paw. "Pika, what happened to you?" he questioned. Pika saw all the other heads pop up at his tone, and soon everyone was gathered around her. "You're hurt," Grease said with a surprised whine. She quickly inspected Pika's side, finding the wound open and bleeding, and began to lick it clean. The family clustered around, her eyes curious. "Whoa, what happened to your face?" Kai said with a laugh. "You got brambles stuck all over it. You left the hillside." Her father interrupted with a growl. Grease stopped looking, exchanging looks with Lamar. "What happened, Pika?" she asked, looking into her daughter's eyes with a mixture of concern and displeasure. Pika desperately wanted to be somewhere else, feeling hot and uncomfortable with 6 eyes staring at her. As she told her story, her siblings' eyes grew wider, and her parents' and Taba's eyes grew angrier. She hurried to the part where she was trapped inside the fence and decided to entirely skip the part where she met Scruff and smelled Jagger. As she finished, she returned to her main point. I know I shouldn't have gone there, but you have to listen to me. There is a huge building. It's bigger than... Pika, Greek cut her off, now furious. You deliberately disobeyed us. Not just in leaving our territory, but in going to see the machines, where we expressly forbid you to go. You put yourself in danger for no reason, and you got hurt. Pika looked down at the ground, unable to speak out of frustration. She knew her mother was right. She had disobeyed them. But why wouldn't they listen to her warning? I know, I'm sorry, but nothing, Lamar broke in with a low growl. You acted selfishly and without thinking. You put us all in danger. And for what? To satisfy your curiosity? I am ashamed of you. Pika's inside shriveled and she dropped her belly to the ground, ears back. She couldn't make eye contact. Taba, go back to the den site with her, Grease instructed. Pika crawled away, her tail tucked between her legs. She felt shame burning through her whole body. She winced in pain as she squeezed under a dark, dense bush. She heard Taba behind her and felt her rough tongue began to gently clean up the blood on her side. It's okay, Pika, whispered Taba. Everyone makes mistakes. I know you didn't mean to put us in danger. Pika looked at her without speaking. What could she say? She felt like no one in her family understood or shared her concern about the construction site. Worse, she didn't get to finish the conversation. With Scruff, why did he suddenly hate her family so much? She sighed. At this point, everything in her life seemed to be going wrong. Her side hurt. She couldn't hunt. She couldn't control her impulses. And every time she thought the mistakes were getting better, she seemed to make another mistake. She closed her eyes, let her head fall heavily onto her front paws. Giving in to the weight of her sadness, she just let her body lie still while Taba did her best to clean her wound. And that's the end of Chapter 7, Donut. Now, it's interesting to see our life through the eyes of an animal, isn't it? Things that we don't think about, we take for granted, we see with new perspective. And that's, again, as we talked about, one of the cool things about a book is it gives you the opportunity to see things from a different perspective in ways perhaps you wouldn't ordinarily do so. Anyway, I hope you have a good week. Enjoy it. Continue to do your schoolwork the best you can, and we will see you for our next chapter, and perhaps another chapter in Peak or The Hobbit if you are interested in those. This is Mr. Bob saying goodbye.